What's up, guys? Nuance Bro checking in, and today we're going to be talking about Jordan Peterson, Michael Eric Dyson, and a little talk with a few others where a few ideas were exchanged, and specifically we're going to be talking about Peterson and Dyson's exchange in this talk, and we're going to offer some commentary on what was discussed. But first, if you support this channel and want to support the work being done here, then please consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. And you can gain access to exclusive full interview clips, as well as access to the exclusive Nuance Bro Discord server, where you can chat with other members and myself. So please visit www.patreon.com/nuancebro to support the channel, and especially if you think we need more nuanced voices in today's world. Now, before we start, I want to recommend that if you guys think I'm taking anything out of context, absolutely, I'm going to leave a link down below for the whole talk. Go ahead, go watch the talk. I encourage it. It's like 2-3 hours long, something like that. But it's a good talk. Lots of good information there. I can't cover everything, obviously, for time's sake, but I just wanted to say that. So we'll start off the video with some points made by Michael Eric Dyson.
I obviously and ideally, and I think Michelle Goldberg does too, agree with the emphasis on individuals. What we're saying to you is that we have not been permitted to be individuals. We have not been permitted to exercise our individual autonomy and authority, and the refusal to do so, to recognize me as an individual, means when you roll up on me and I'm a 12-year-old boy in a park and you shoot first, in ways you do to black kids that you don't do to white kids, you are not treating that person as an individual. If we're living in a society where women are subject to aberrant forms of horrid, patriarchal, sexist, and misogynist behavior, you are not acknowledging the centrality of the individuality of women. You are treating them according to a group dynamic. And if we get beyond the ability of people on the right to understand the degree to which they have operated from the basis of benefit from group identity without having said, I'll end by saying this. The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
Okay. So here Dyson talks about how certain groups are benefiting from group identity, and that once people are treated as individuals, then we can get away we can all be on equal footing and we don't have to do this identity politics stuff or whatever. So that's good. He says he wants to be treated like an individual. He believes in individualism and individuality, and I guess he doesn't like group identity. He prefers individualism over that. But he doesn't really lay out how he would quantify when we've achieved individuality. Because if you listen to this talk later on, Peterson goes out and he asks, how can we determine when the left's gone too far? We're going to include that clip in just a bit. But he acknowledges that they already conceded that they're against equity. They're against equal outcomes. They don't think that's good. So that's good. That's good that they acknowledge that. But if that's not the basis by which you're going to measure when we've overcome this sort of discrimination based on group identity, you're not really offering any sort of solutions or metrics by which we can measure anything to be like, all right, we've overcome this. We don't have to do this identity politics stuff anymore. He's setting it up in a way that he can kind of continue to do this identity politics thing until the end of time. But let's listen to Peterson's response.
Let's assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's fine. That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
So here you can see Michael Eric Dyson kind of, just being a bit childish. He's going, kind of almost implying that when Peterson said, well, you would think that, he was making it like sort of racial, or those racial connotations behind it, when he's just saying you as a person, Michael Eric Dyson, based on all the other things you've said tonight, and just basically what I've seen throughout your career, yeah, you would say that. But he's not saying, like, Dyson's just playing this total victimhood identity politics game where he's saying, oh, you definitely said that because I'm a black man. Obviously, he didn't say it in those words there, but when he said, oh, was that very individual of you? Yeah, it was, because that's the type of person you are. He's not talking about your race. He's not talking about, any sort of group identity you're a part of. He's saying you, Michael Eric Dyson, would say that. But Dyson sees everything as part of race. And I'm not sure if he genuinely believes this or if he's just trying to appeal to his audience because he feels like they're dumb enough to believe what he's saying. But we'll get more into the, pandering to the audience a little bit later.
Let's get precise about this. Okay.
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing. Now,
precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so, if we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this nonsense.
So Peterson did some important things here. He was talking about, all right, if we're going to talk about this idea of white privilege, this notion of white privilege, and we're going to not just complain about it, we're not just going to complain about how there's discrimination and all that stuff. Let's be concrete about it. Let's set out some parameters so that we can actually find a solution to this problem and not just kind of make it all wishy-washy and kind of be like, well, it's out there in the ether. We can't really quantify it. Let's quantify it so we can actually overcome it. Let's not just complain about things. Let's offer solutions so we can overcome this. So he's trying to go about doing that. And then the other question that Peterson asks is, okay, how can we measure when the left goes too far? Because he already says how the other side already conceded that they're against equity or equality of outcome. But if that's not the basis by which we're going to measure differences or how people are unequal by where they end up in life, the outcome of things, if we're not going to measure based on that data point, then what are we going to use to measure? How are we going to, what's the correct metric by which we're going to use to measure how people are truly equal? So let's see the response.
On Jordan's point about how does he, in a sense, get an equal voice in this debate back if it is implied that his participation brings with it this baggage of white privilege that doesn't allow him to see clearly the issues that are before us.
But that is to be complicit in the very problem itself terminologically. You're beginning at a point that's already productive and controversial. You're saying, how can he get his equality back? Who are you talking about? Jordan Peterson, trending #1 on Twitter? Jordan Peterson, with an international bestseller? I want him to tweet something out about me in my book.
So here the presenter's asking a question about how can Peterson get his equal footing in this debate as far as, because you're claiming because of his white privilege, he can't have an equal voice in this because he's complicit in a system that's designed to benefit whites at the detriment of blacks, sort of thing. And because of that, you're saying his voice matters less than yours does. That's what the presenter's saying. And then Dyson comes back with, what are you talking about? He's got successful books. He's in the media all the time. And then, Peterson says, well, it's mostly negative articles, but that's beside the point. He's conflating, being at least considered to be, all right, we're just talking about ideas here. My race shouldn't really, you shouldn't really discount me because of my race. Kind of address my arguments and don't play this identity politics game in this debate. He's not talking about, success in life here, but then Dyson brings up his success in life and he's conflating the two. It's a really dishonest game here.
Jordan Peterson, right? This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man, and you're gonna get us right. And I have never seen so much wine and snowflaking. There's enough wine in here to start a vineyard. And what I'm saying to you empirically and precisely, when you ask the question about white privilege, the fact that you ask it in the way you did, dismissive, pseudoscientific, non-empirical, and without justification, the truth is that white privilege doesn't act according to quantifiable segments. It's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it's based. Number two, what's interesting to me, you're talking about not having a collective identity. What do you call a nation? Are you Canadian? Are you Canadian by yourself? Are you an individual, or are you part of a group? When America formed its union, it did so in opposition to another group.
So Dyson said a lot of things there. He brought up how Peterson is a mean, angry white man and decided to bring race into it. And he talked about how there was a lot of whining going on, kind of, doing the whole, reversing the whole snowflake dynamic. Because usually when people call people snowflakes or that they're triggered, it's usually to people on the left who are these, over the top, politically correct social justice warriors. But he's doing this sort of dishonest game of flipping it on Jordan Peterson, where he's not really whining or anything. He's not saying he's a victim. He's not playing, if anyone's playing any sort of victim narrative, it's Mr. Dyson here. But he's just trying to pander to the audience. He's not really trying to have a intellectually honest discussion with, Peterson or Fry in this instance. He's trying to convince the audience, which he's probably convinced of is not that intelligent, so they'll just kind of buy what he's saying. I mean, it's kind of evidenced by what he says here when let's dissect what Dyson said in this. It's a really crazy sentence, but he said, white privilege doesn't act according to quantifiable segments. It's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it is based. You listen to that, and parts of it seems to make sense as a sentence, sort of, but when you put it all together, none of it really means anything. So when he says, he's talking about white privilege, and he says, it's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideas of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it is based. What do you mean? What does that mean? I mean, it's not that I'm too dumb to understand this. It's just that it doesn't actually mean anything. He talks in this sort of very it's a huckster snake oil salesman thing, which, Fry gets into a little bit later, but he's not really saying anything of actual substance. He says things that kind of feel nice or feel they feel right to us, the demographic that he's trying to appeal to, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And it's almost like circular reasoning, because he's talking about white privilege, and he says the degree to which we are willing as a grapple with the ideas of such a which it's based upon. Well, what's based upon? White privilege. He's referring back to it. It's like this circular sort of reasoning. He's not actually defining or doing anything. So we're trying to fit. This was in response to Peterson saying, how much of my white privilege is responsible for where I've ended up in life. And he doesn't want to answer this because Dyson doesn't want an actual way for us to overcome any sort of inequality or injustices, because if you quantify things, that means you can actually measure, and then you can actually move beyond things. But if you kind of make it all wishy-washy and not very clear, and it's out there in the ether, we can't really quantify it, it's not in quantifiable segments, as he would say, well, then we can never solve this. What's the point of even trying? It's almost making the argument that a lot of the alt-right people say, that we should just separate based on these ideas of groups. And then the other thing that Dyson brings up is, well, what's the idea of a nation? What is America? Is that not a group? Well, Peterson never denied the existence of groups. He just says when you make group identity, especially things that are, things that you can't control, it's not based on ideas, but it's based on things that you're kind of born into, or they're not really important to who you are as a person necessarily. I mean, when you're saying, well, I'm black, therefore I have extra value, or my opinion or arguments mean more in this instance, he's talking about that kind of identity politics. When you bring the idea of group identity and make that paramount, that's what Peterson said. He wasn't talking about group identities just not existing or not being important. In fact, he does think they're important. He talks about this at length, but he's saying don't make that the most important thing.
Well, what I derive from that series of rebuttals, let's say, is twofold. The first is that saying that the radical left goes too far when they engage in violence is not a sufficient response by any stretch of the imagination, because there are sets of ideas in radical leftist thinking that led to the catastrophes of the 20th century, and that was at the level of idea, not at the level of violent action. It's a very straightforward thing to say you're against violence. It's like being against poverty. It's like, you know, generically speaking, decent people are against poverty and violence. It doesn't address the issue in the least. And with regards to my privilege or lack thereof, I mean, I'm not making the case that I haven't had advantages in my life and disadvantages in my life like most people. You don't know anything about my background or where I came from, and it doesn't matter to you because fundamentally I'm a mean white man. That's a hell of a thing to say in a debate.
Let me just say,
very, very brief, because I want to move on to men and women. A good topic next.
The mean mad white comment was not predicated upon my historical excavation of your past. It's based upon the evident vitriol with which you speak and the denial of a sense of equanimity among combatants in an argument. So I'm saying again, you're a mean mad white man, and the viciousness is evident.
Okay. Let's reset.
So here Peterson acknowledges the whole mean, mad white man comment, and you know it's not a nice thing to say. There's nothing. There was no reason to bring race into this. And then Dyson just basically doubles down. He uses a lot of big words to try and confuse people and make his point sound like it means it was like legitimate or something. And he's gonna do this some more later, but you know he just kind of doubles down on this idea that, oh yeah, you're a mean, mad white man. I'm going to say it again.
Well, I think I'm going to point out two things again. The first is that my question about when the left goes too far still hasn't been answered. And then the second thing I'm going to point out is that, you know, it's conceivable that I am a mean man. You know, I mean, maybe I'm meaner than some people and not as mean as others. I think that's probably more the case. But I would say the fact that race got dragged into that particular comment is a better exemplar of what the hell I think is wrong with the politically correct left than anything else that could have possibly happened.
So now Peterson kind of more directly responds to this idea of the being called a mean white man. He actually concedes that, you know, I might be a mean man. But then he goes, it's like, why would you bring race into this? And he kind of points that out as probably one of the biggest, you know, like examples of what's wrong with what he calls the radical left. So now Dyson's going to respond, and this is amazing to me. I love this. You got to watch this.
Imagine the hurt, the anxiety, the insult that you might genuinely feel, according to what I felt was an appropriate comment of description at the moment of its expression. But imagine now those hurt feelings and
not hurt.
Okay, you feel great. You feel great about it.
It's really different. I'm not a victim. I'm not hurt. I'm appalled.
You're not hurt. Okay, you wouldn't be a victim. So what's interesting is that whatever non-traditional feelings of empathy you endure at this particular point, the point is, imagine then the horrors that so many others have had to put up with for so long when they are refused to acknowledge their humanity. Now, I take your point seriously.
So your group of
let me finish. Let me finish, though. Let me finish.
To me.
Let me finish, sir.
That figures.
You're not my inquisitioner, okay? What I'm saying to you is that when you said you were upset that I added the element of race there, right? When I said mean, mad, white man. Well, what's interesting is that you may have felt that you were being ascribed a group identity to which you do not subscribe. You may have felt that you were being unfairly judged according to your particular race. You may have felt that your individual identity was being besmirched by my rather careless characterization of you, all of which qualifies for a legitimate, response to me, but also the point we've been trying to make about the refusal to see our individual existence as women, as people of color, as First Nation people, and the like.
So this is amazing. You can see what Dyson's doing here. He's trying to divert and be like, well, you felt this way about what I said to you, but imagine how others feel when things are whatever, more, worse things have happened to them, more oppressive actions taken towards them. And it's like, okay, but that's not what we're talking about. It's like, something can be wrong and something can be worse than what was wrong, but it doesn't mean that what you said was right. You can still at least apologize and be like, you know what, maybe that was wrong. Maybe I went a little too far. Maybe that had nothing to do. I just kind of got carried away. But Dyson doesn't apologize. He's actually kind of trying to justify what he did based on, well, this is worse over here. Other people experience worse things. Yeah, but do two wrongs make a right? That doesn't make sense. That's not a real argument to say worse things happen to people, therefore I was right in saying what I said to you. But try to flip that. Imagine if Peterson, because, Dyson comes off as kind of angry and mean and just, not very mean-spirited what he's saying. Imagine if he called Dyson a mean, angry black man. Oh my God, the press would just go crazy. They'd be saying, Peterson's an alt-right Nazi, which they already kind of do anyways, but it would just be even crazier in that instance. But it's totally okay for Dyson to attack Peterson on this point. But if Peterson did that, it would just be the end of the world. And it's just crazy to see Dyson trying to justify his actions here. And he keeps going.
My point simply has been, the reason I talked about race and that particular characterization, because there's a particular way in which I have come to a city. I don't know if there are a lot of black people out here, not sure. But I constantly come to places and spaces that are not my natural habitat, other than intellectual engagement and the love and the fury of rhetorical engagement, yes. But I often go into hostile spaces where people will not vote in favor for my particular viewpoint because I'm interested as an individual of breaking down barriers so that people can understand just how complicated it is. So what I'm saying to you is that I would invite you, in terms of the surrender of your privilege, to give you a specific response. Come with me to a Black Baptist church. Come with me to a historically black college. Come to me to an indigenous or First Nations community where we're able to engage in some of the lovely conversation, but also to listen and hear. And when I added race to that, I was talking about the historically evinced inability to acknowledge others' pains equally to the one that they are presently enduring.
This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Like the diversion here of like just bouncing over, like he's going, oh, the reason I called you an angry white man, I brought race into it. And then he starts jumping into, well, I'm here. I go to places where people don't look. I don't know if there's a lot of black people in the audience here. And then he jumps over to like, you know what? Come with me to a black church. Like he's just saying things like they kind of sound nice, but it's like this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It's like, it's really amazing to watch this because if you actually understand what he's doing, he's not trying to actually address the issue. He knows he's wrong. He actually knows, oh crap, there was really no reason for me to actually bring race into this. I wasn't really expecting him to jump on me like that. And I don't want to apologize because it's going to make in his mind, if he apologizes, it makes him look like he lost the argument. So he's trying to double down here and, he's trying to, I think he's just experienced in debates. And he's not trying to convince the other side. He's trying to convince the audience. If you've ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking, there's a fantastic scene where the dad is teaching his son, because he's a lobbyist, his job is to be right and prove others are wrong and, just always win. And he gives an example to his son. I'm going to include the clip right here.
So what happens when you're wrong?
Oh, Joey, I'm never wrong.
But you can't always be right.
Well, if it's your job to be right, then you're never wrong.
But what if you are wrong?
Okay, let's say that you're defending chocolate and I'm defending vanilla. Now, if I were to say to you, vanilla is the best flavor ice cream, you'd say?
No, chocolate is.
Exactly. But you can't win that argument. So, I'll ask you. So you think chocolate is the end-all and be-all of ice cream, do you?
it's the best ice cream. I wouldn't order any other.
Oh, so it's all chocolate for you, is it?
Yes, chocolate is all I need.
Well, I need more than chocolate. And for that matter, I need more than vanilla. I believe that we need freedom and choice when it comes to our ice cream, and that, Joy Naylor, that is the definition of liberty.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Ah, but that's what I'm talking about.
But you didn't prove that vanilla's the best.
I didn't have to. I proved that you're wrong, and if you're wrong, I'm right.
But you still didn't convince me.
It's that I'm not after you. I'm after them.
So you see, it's not actually about being right. It's about the perception that the other person is wrong so that you are by default right in the eyes of the audience. You're not trying to convince your opponent. You're not trying to have an actual intellectual discussion. It's all about manipulation of the audience. You're trying to convince them. And the idea is that they're stupid and that they're not going to catch your tricks and see what you're actually doing. So Dyson here doesn't have a ton of respect for the audience. He's saying, I'm in this place. I don't know if there's a lot of black people, not a lot of people who look like me. And, you know, Peterson, come with me to a black church, blah, blah. It's like, what does this have to do with anything? None of this has to do with him calling him a mean, angry white man and addressing the racial component to it. He just jumps around trying to recover, hoping people actually forget what he was originally talking about and not being able to connect. Like, none of these dots really make sense. It's amazing.
Well, I've been fascinated by this conversation. There's been an enormous clash of cultures in the conversation. We've had, you know, classic, if I can call it, huckstering snake oil pulpit talk, which is, it's a mode of discourse, it's a rhetorical style that I find endlessly refreshing and vivifying, but I'm not sure that we actually focused on the point in question, and I don't think we should underestimate how much this feeling is prevalent in the culture of this strange paradox that the liberals are illiberal in their demand for liberality. They are exclusive in their demand for inclusivity. They are homogeneous in their demand for heterogeneity. They are somehow undiverse in their call for diversity. You can be diverse but not diverse in your opinions and in your language and in your behavior. And that's a terrible pity. So I would say that I'm sorry that it got a bit heated in places, because I was hoping it wouldn't. I was hoping it would be a shining example of how people of all different kinds of political outlooks can speak with humor and wit and a lightness of touch. As G.K. Chesterton said, angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And I think it's very important for us, who are privileged, all four of us, privileged to be here, to be asked to be here, to take ourselves a little bit more lightly, not to be too earnest, too pompous, too serious, and not to be too certain. It's a time, I think, for really engaging, emotionally fulfilling, passionate, and positive doubt. That's what I would urge. Thank you.
So at the end of the talk here, Fry actually makes a point about how Dyson is he doesn't say Dyson directly, but everyone knows he's talking about Dyson, about how he's he talks like a snake, he talks a bit like a snake oil salesman, or he's a bit of a huckster, which it's totally true. Anyone who has any sort of sense within them can see this sort of act from a mile away. And then he actually ends his speech on a bit of a beautiful note. He talks about how, you know, let's not be so certain about the things we talk about. Have a little bit of, you know, some healthy doubt in what you're saying. Like, always question what you believe and why, you know, kind of the same things we talk about on this channel. You know, when we go and interview people, find out what they believe and why. Don't be so certain in what you believe all the time. You could definitely be wrong. Be open to being wrong. Try to prove yourself wrong. Try to falsify what you believe, and then you'll come to, you know, more true conclusions. So he ends his speech on that note. And then Dyson just has to respond to this claim of snake oil salesman and hucksterism. So let's take a look at that.
I'm used to not exclusively white men who see black intelligence articulated at a certain level feeling a kind of condescension. If I came up here, Mr. I was saying the other day, but a kind of verbal facility automatically assumed to be a kind of hucksterism and snake oil salesman. I've seen that. I get it. I get hate letters every day from white brothers and sisters who are mad I'm teaching their children. You're just trying to co-opt our children. you're trying to corrupt them. Yes, I'm trying to corrupt them so they will be uncorrupted by the corruptibility that they've inherited from a society that refuses to see all people as human beings. The death threats I have received constantly for simply trying to speak my mind, it's not about a politically correct society that is open-minded and that has some consternation about my ability to speak. I'm getting real live. You want empirical death threats that talk about killing me, setting up to hurt me and harm me simply because I choose to speak my mind.
So here Dyson invokes race as, saying that Fry was trying to delegitimize him by calling him a snake oil salesman or a huckster and saying that they're not used to an intellectual black man speaking. And he kind of just paints himself as this like victim and they're being racist towards him and like they wouldn't do this to him, and basically implying they wouldn't do this to a white man if he was speaking the same way that he was and all that stuff, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And you can see Fry laughing in the background. He's like, oh my God, he's going to do this whole like, oh, woe is me, I'm a victim of this racism, but I'm strong against it, I'm used to this. And then he goes into more, victim mentality stuff where he talks about, I get threats about this all the time and people threaten my life and all that stuff. Peterson and Fry get threats like crazy. I mean, Fry's an atheist. Fry is a gay atheist Jew. I mean, gets plenty of death threats, believe me. And then Peterson gets death threats all the time and people calling him alt-right, neo-Nazi, crazy stuff. I mean, you didn't see them talking about how they're, woe is me, I'm a victim and all that stuff. They're not trying to embrace that victim mentality, but Dyson, that's his go-to, that's his shtick, that's his game. All he can talk about is, racial oppression, victimhood, and that's what his whole thing is all about. And I love this quote that he puts in because it just kind of demonstrates his bullshit language. It's not real. He's not really saying anything. He's just trying to say things that seem profound without them actually meaning anything. He talks about how he's like, oh, well, they say I'm corrupting this. Yes, I'm trying to corrupt them to become incorruptible from the corruptibility that they have inherited. That doesn't mean anything. You can't corrupt someone to become uncorrupted or uncorruptible. Anyways, that's the end of the video, guys. It was kind of stressful. I honestly didn't know what to say to some of this stuff because it's just so ridiculous. But don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. Social media links are in the description box below. And I'll see you next time, bro.